Imagine a place where every face is the exact same color, exact same race, where everybody thinks just like everyone else, and any perspective outside is put on the shelf. Is that really a place where anyone is free? Free to be you? Free to be me? In its essence, the place you are imagining in your mind's eye is my hometown. I grew up in rural America where the majority of the place was white. Even in 2010, it was still sitting at a 95.5% white majority. I grew restless of this monoculture and dreamed of something more. I craved culture, variety, and freedom to be different. And while I didn't travel outside the country as a young girl, I did travel in my imagination through the magical vehicle of National Geographic magazines. The imagery allowed me to dip into cultures around the world. And one could say at this point, an obsession between photography and culture was ignited within me and would eventually lead me to my life's calling as a humanitarian photographer. I went on to study international relations and worked abroad in Jamaica after graduation. I fell in love with the culture and people there, but was also challenged to step outside of my comfort zone and expand my worldview. I was poked and prodded to step into my assertiveness, to find my voice and stand up for what I believe in. I learned the true definition of resilience and self-reliance, and I recognized opportunities and resources that I had taken for granted my whole life and saw them with a new appreciation. I was hosted by families and communities that exemplified love and hospitality that was second to none. But what I truly received was a sense of expansive freedom when I realized that life could be different than it was in my small hometown. I was awestruck by the cultural differences of the people that I photographed. But I also recognized a place of common ground. The expressions held in their faces and bodies, I saw myself reflected in them. From despair to elation, I recognized that we are not different, that we all contain this microcosm of emotional diversity within us. But I questioned, with this common denominator that connects us, what are the factors that divide us? And what are the solutions to unite us? And I found that the factors that divide humanity at large, this macrocosm of cultural diversity, are the same factors that divide us within. The misinterpretation of the contrasts in our lives and the misunderstanding of what true power is and how to access it. So what is contrast? Contrast is a feedback system, a messenger. Think autocorrective GPS. It is constantly showing us what is not working in our lives and meant to turn us in the direction of a clear, alternative solution. Or in other words, when we know what we don't want, we know what we do want with more clarity. How would we know the value of our joy if we had never experienced the contrast of despair? Or how would we know the value of health if we had never experienced the contrast of being sick? Many people avoid the discomfort of the contrast in their lives at all costs. Let me ask you, how fully do you embrace the microcosm of your emotional diversity? Are you as apt to embrace the uncomfortable emotions in your lives as you are to embrace the comfortable ones? These parts of ourselves that we deem too uncomfortable to embrace comprise what is known as the contrast of our inner shadow. Swiss psychologist Carl Jung said that the shadow is the person that we would rather not be. For example, anger, greed, even racism. For instance, I thought for many years of my life that I could avoid certain emotional groups altogether. I was anger-phobic and panicked and felt immense guilt and shame every time I would think an angry thought. let alone express an angry behavior. Shadow expert Debbie Ford says that we can identify our shadow by what we judge in others. And indeed, I was judgmental of angry people. I thought that somehow I was different than them, that I just didn't have this emotion. But what I didn't realize is that anger is an essential part of who I am. But where do we find the value in something as uncomfortable as anger? What about the anger that we feel in the face of an injustice that turns us in the direction of a clear alternative solution? Our anger takes us from a place of disempowerment to empowerment. So how do we begin to embrace an even bigger shadow? A shadow of racism. Racism can be understood as the rejection of the macrocosm of cultural diversity at large, and is rooted in fear and powerlessness. It is showing us that we have yet to embrace our inherent worth for simply being human beings. Because if we were to embrace that inherent worth, we would have to acknowledge and embrace the inherent worth of all other human beings as well, regardless of the flag of their nation or the color of the suit of their skin. We all desire to feel free and empowered, as we well should. And racism is just a misunderstood attempt to access empowerment. If you can find a reason such as skin color or culture to overpower another human being, it may make you feel bigger, powerful, and stronger in that moment, but you can never access your true power by trying to minimize somebody else's power. Your true power is exponentially more powerful than that, and is found in perhaps the counterintuitive opposite, in the finding and creating of solutions that empower others around you. Journalist Robert Wright explains something called a non-zero-sum game, meaning that the fortunes of nations are correlated and interdependent for better or for worse. If we want to succeed, we must also want others to succeed. We cannot begin to imagine solutions that only benefit one group of people and expect them to last. We are all better off when we create solutions that are win-win. The danger in denying our shadow is that it numbs ourselves to our pain, but it also numbs ourselves to the ability to feel compassion and connection. And when we can't feel the capacity to connect, we feel numb to the atrocities that we see on the news and feel complacent and powerless to make a change. We can begin to shed this numbness by becoming mindfully aware of what we are feeling without trying to push it away or numb it. Buddhist nun Pema Chodron says that we can use all the unwanted things in our lives as the means for awakening compassion. When we become aware of our inner shadow and embrace it with compassion, we can also become aware of the shadows in others and embrace it with compassion as well. The shadow is our doorway to unity and cultural diversity. For it is through the embracing of the microcosm of emotional diversity within ourselves that we gain the capacity to embrace the macrocosm of cultural diversity. There is a huge range of culture represented right here in Bismarck. I personally know people from Afghanistan, Peru, Colombia, Congo, Cameroon, Kenya, China, to name a few. I know community members that have been through the unspeakable atrocities of all-out war, fled their home country to neighboring nations to seek refuge, and spent decades of their lives in refugee camps where all of their children were born, sometimes surviving on as little as one grain-based meal per day, sometimes less. I would argue that these international community members know the value of peace, just as anyone else who has been through war, because they have experienced the contrast of conflict. They have incredible, valuable perspective that can contribute to community-oriented solutions. However, this amazing resource of perspective frequently goes untapped. We are all living in the same geographical location, oftentimes without seeing or acknowledging each other at all. So in the spirit of creating a solution, I have created a photography program called the Human Atlas of Bismarck. The project simply provides a platform for international residents to be seen and heard in their own voice, dissolving false misconceptions and prejudices, and showing us what their positive perspective can add to our community. Take Vumilia, for example. Originally from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and eventually Tanzania, and mind you, this is translated from Swahili. When asked what her culture can contribute to our community, she said, first of all, I can say about love, to love each other. For example, you are my friend. You love me, I love you. I can tell you something good. You can tell me something good. And we can all teach each other something good. Tanzania people, they have love. And Mandeep from Nepal, when asked why diversity in a community is important to him, he said, because it makes me feel that I am not the only one who is different. And that is also my understanding that a diverse community is a welcoming community. Can you see yourself reflected in their stories and experiences? What would the world be without this incredible diversity of cultures? Anthropologist Margaret Mead said that her greatest fear was as we drifted towards this blandly amorphous, generic worldview. Not only would we see the human imagination reduced to a more narrow modality of thought, but we would awaken from a dream one day, having forgotten there were even other possibilities. Cultures are constantly evolving. We have the capacity to create whatever culture we want to right here in our community. I envision a culture that embraces the microcosm and macrocosm of its diversity, where we celebrate the multiplicity of worldviews, and where we realize that there is a freedom when we recognize that life does not have to be lived in one way, but that we are truly limitless to be ourselves. So I have 3 action steps for you to take home today to begin embracing diversity. First is to embrace the microcosm of your inner diversity, the microcosm of your emotional diversity. Through self-awareness, you can embrace your shadow with compassion and acknowledge your inherent worth as a human being. Which leads us into step 2, embrace the macrocosm of cultural diversity. Acknowledge the inherent worth of all other people as well. And do something as simple as reaching out and having a conversation, joining an organization, and simply, at the very least, advocate for internationals in our community. And third is to step into your true purpose and power, which we now know is in the finding and creating of solutions that empower others around you. The factors that divide humanity at large are the same that divide us within. The solution is found when we embrace our contrast, which opens the door for us to step into our true purpose and power, creating solutions to empower others. Are you holding yourself away from your purpose by ruminating powerlessly in the contrast in your life? Or are you using the contrast to propel you to your greatest, limitless, solution-creating potential? Thank you.